Well, now we're going to do a little something different tonight. Rather than continue with the individual segments, I want to go to the featured modeler section tonight. And it's called N-Scale Today. Well, why do it? Well, when I was an N-Scaler back in the late 50s, 60s, I gave up. I couldn't keep the cars on the track. I couldn't make the track function. Couldn't get the engines to run properly. In effect, the electronics in it and the ability for me to actually have an operating railroad, I couldn't figure out how to do it in N-Scale. So I gave up. Well, today, I understand that N-Scale is totally different. The equipment is totally different, and it's reliable. The track is different, it's reliable. The cars are different, they're reliable. There's a lot of other products on the market to go with it. So it seems to me that N-Track today is nothing like what we may have remembered. So it may deserve a second look by some of us. So what I've done is put together a panel of 3 people. There were supposed to be more than that, but the other 2 that I had scheduled for this, for one reason or another, had to cancel out for tonight. So we're down to 3 excellent N-Scale modelers: Chris Smith, Eric Sutton, and Paul Beneke. So we've covered why we're going to do this and why it may be worth a second look by some modelers who gave up in the past on N-Scale. So with that said, what I'd like to do is start off by introducing the 3 modelers that are on our panel and have them talk for a short period of time about themselves and their modeling in N-Scale. So with that said, I'd like to start with Chris Smith. Chris, welcome.
All right, thank you. And what I'm going to do for a short intro is show a few teaser slides, and we'll make this short, Jim, less than 5 minutes, and then we can move on. So I'm going to go ahead and share. All right, N-Scale today. Well, I call it detail and precision. A little bit of, most of you have seen this. I've been in N-Scale since 1969. I have an operating layout. Locomotives, plenty to choose from. I'm primarily a diesel modeler, but there are also quite a bit of N-Scale steam, probably not as much as HO, but it's out there. But the diesel selection is quite varied. Yes, we use sound. I put sound in all of my operating locomotives. Most of the work I have to do myself. I'll tear down a new, fresh out of the box, get it prepared. I use a Proxon mill to mill the frames when it needs to be, and most of the time it does need some milling for speakers and so forth. I make my own speaker boxes if I have to. I use sugar cube speakers. Lots of planning involved, but it's worth it. I usually put my own lighting in the locomotives. I also have battery-only powered locomotives. I build its standard locomotive that's got a modified DCC decoder and then a harness to a battery car. You can see that on the right. Layout building does take as much precision for good track work. I use Fremo technique, as well as I've got scratch build. There's 3 turnouts in the right-hand photo that are scratch built, and that was 25 years ago, long before fast tracks existed, but it does take precision. Laying out compound ladders, because there's not as much space, especially when you're going to use turnout motors. Doesn't matter what motors you're using, you have to plan ahead. So this staging yard was built on the workbench upside down, so I made sure things fit. You can see the wiring harness, and I've got barrier strips because all frogs on my layout are powered frogs. That's a necessity for various reasons that I won't go into right now. I always put the landforms, as soon as the track is laid and running, the landforms go in because it keeps small N-Scale rolling stock from falling 5 feet to the concrete floor. All of those landforms are also removable for maintenance. That's just an example I won't go into right now. The other thing is with a layout in a medium to large N scale layout, you can't cheat on the DCC wiring and installation. You need distributed DCC zones, and that has to be planned ahead. And lastly, most important for me, it is an operating scale. We can operate small switching operations as well as longer trains, if that's what you like, with all the typical operating processes, uncoupling, and so forth. So that's what I have for an intro.
Well, Chris, I appreciate it so much, and I appreciate you being here. Next, I'd like to turn to Eric Sutton. Eric, welcome.
Thank you very much for inviting me on.
Yes, sir.
Um,
I'm not seeing the video. I'm not seeing your face, Eric.
you're not. That's interesting. I'm on the screen. Hang on a second.
There you are.
All right. Well, that's a nice still of me. There we. Can you see me now? Is my
Yes.
head moving?
Yes.
All right. Great. Okay. I got into N scale when I was about 10 years old, and my dad had bought me a Pennsylvania Railroad passenger set and then a freight set. Both of these were Bachmann sets. Had a great time with them for about 3-4 days before I started bending track and bending connectors. And I also have 3 older brothers who'd like to torture me, so stuff would get damaged on the way, but I had fun nevertheless. I kept that set up and through high school and would pull it out occasionally, but it was off, it was awful, it was troublesome. And I really didn't understand, that, although back then things were toy-like and transferring into, model, actual models, quality was still pretty poor, power, there was just all sorts of headaches with it. And I pretty much laid it aside until about 5 years ago and said, my kids are grown up. I'm going to start collecting again. So I started collecting, totally not knowing what I was getting into. You can see behind my shoulder, I have actually 3 display cases of stuff I've been collecting. They're a little bit of everything, old Bachmans, MRCs, Limas, a lot of the old stuff that I've restored. And above that on the shelves is my Cato collection, which I've, I'll preach the gospel of Cato. I absolutely love it. And it works for me because of the way Cato had designed their systems to be built quickly and taken apart quickly. Now, this is philosophy is basically because in Japan, the homes don't have any room. So if you want to play with your trains, you lay them out after breakfast and pack them up before dinner, and then get them out the next weekend. I'm going to do some share screens of my layout and to show you what I'm doing. It's rather rather large, and it's still in the mock-up phase. I think I'm on my 10th mock-up now because I keep on experimenting. The hobby's still new to me, so I'm learning every day. Anyway, getting back to the Cato philosophy, I'm getting ready to move in a couple of years, so my whole setup is designed to be broken apart and moved easily. So I don't have mountains, I don't have scenery, trees and stuff like that. I just have basically an urban layout that is in various stages of being built. So without further ado, let me go to share screen, and basically my setup is the main part is urban environment. It's 6x8, expanding to 6x10 with a small port that I'm building, and I'll be building a ship with that too, but that's in future. Right now, I'm just still mocking everything up. So far, that's pretty much all I have is as far as what I've been doing. And I'll pass it back to Jim.
I got into N scale in about 1980, 79, 80, somewhere in there, when I went to a mall here. I live in Golden, Colorado, and I went to a mall and they had a train show going on. And in the process of walking up and down, looking at the trains running, I ran across the Amtrak group. And I happened to know one of the people that was in Amtrak there. And we talked quite a bit and talked a little bit about N scale. And at the time I had no hobbies. I was watching too much football. And I thought it would be good to get into into a hobby. And I didn't have much room. If I could, I would like to share my screen here. And can I share my screen?
Yeah, go ahead, Paul. Push on that.
Wait a minute here. Now, is that showing up or not?
No, there it is. No,
It's just thumbnails.
I'm having the
thumbnail
same-
pictures.
I'm having the same look as Eric. Let me,
Pat, he can just double click on them, can he?
Yeah, you should be able to double click
There
on
you
it.
go.
There you
How about
go.
that?
How
Yeah,
about
got it.
that?
okay, here we go. Finally, I'm technically obsolete also. Anyway, my railroad's a Grand Road. It's an N scale, and we're in this today. So here we go. The only room I had was up in the attic. And so I built a layout up in the attic. And after about 3 years, it was totally inoperable. And the reason was because the temperature changes broke all of the solder joints. So I talked my wife out into a room down in the basement, which is 9 feet by 13 feet. And I built a layout in it that went around the wall. There's some thoughts here. In a room that small, certainly you can't run HO equipment in there without simply just being a loop. It's just too small. So anyway, the N scale fit in there really well. I was able to use 24-inch radius curves. I started the layout in 1985 and I finished it by the NMRA convention in Denver here in 1991, and it was on the layout tour. We had a couple of hundred people through this room, which can only hold about 4 people once you get in. Once you get the layout built, there's not much room in the middle. The layout concept, it is contemporary. In other words, it's today. And it's a proto-freelance. And I'm influenced by the Moffett Road, which is not too far from my house. And whenever I need some inspiration, I get my camera and truck and go up there. And you'll be surprised what's new. It's very dynamic. The latest, not too long ago, I put in solar powered flange oilers on my layout. And just most recently, I put in ATC equipment, towers and antennas and so forth. The layout in a room that small, you get two choices, in my opinion. You can either have a rail fan layout or a switching layout, and I'm not much into switching, so I put in a rail fan layout, and I'll show you a few pictures in a minute here. But I have no switching. There's no way to pass because the room is just too small. If I had a passing track, it would have to be through a double tracked tunnel. And I'll promise you in the West here, there are no double tracked tunnels. You can have two tunnels side by side, but not double track. Whoops, didn't mean to do that. Well, what the heck happened there? I want to go back. Hang on a second here, gang. I'm getting myself in trouble here. Okay. The train, I really love Amtrak, and I run long trains when we have Amtrak shows. And on this layout, I have storage tracks, and the longest one can hold 55 cars, and that's what I have in there. I have a 55-car coal train. The shortest is a 20 cars, but don't be fooled by that. But those cars are auto racks, so they're 96-foot long, 96-foot long cars. It's a pretty good sized train also. I use lots of DPU. If you go up on the Moffat Road today, there's lots and lots of DPU operation, and that's what I do. I have seven staging tracks and 7 trains on them, one of them being Amtrak. And I use DCC to control the system. Now let me get going here. Let's see. Let me get this thing back together again here. Okay, here we go. This is the upper level, which is the viewing level, which you can see, and it is nothing more than a twice through loop. The lower level is where I have the staging. You cannot see it. You have to have an ability to know where the trains are, and I use infrared detection. This is what you can do in N scale. This is these are Cato SD70 ACEs. I'm with Eric. The Cato probably is one of the major reasons that N scale exists today, because they have some terrific equipment. This is these engines, I've cut the handrails off and replaced them with brass, which means you can do some modeling. You just not just out of the box and put it on the layout and run it. My layout's proto freelance. It's called the Grand Road. You can put windshield wipers on these things. You can do all kinds of stuff. This is Amtrak at my depot in Terra Creek. These are phase 3 Amtrak engines. Like I say, I model contemporary, so these are no longer on the layout. This is obsolete on the way I look at how things are today. This is the other side of the layout from the last picture. I use DPUs. This train is a 45 car freight train with a 2x2x0 DPUs. This is Amtrak. This is the latest version, or latest paint version, version 5. Leaving my town, which is called Terra Creek. I scratch built the signals because you can do that in N scale, and it's small enough that nobody knows what you did. They can't see it. But these are 3-color LEDs. If you go up on the Moffat and look around, they took the searchlight signals out and replaced them with 3-color signals in what they call a deep hood, which is very deep. And the idea is to keep the snow out so you can see the colors when you're running a train. This is back to the depot, which is called Terra Creek. It's here. I built a engine house here, which you might want to think about if you ever are in Colorado and know anything about the Rio Grande, the Minturn. It's spelled Minturn, but it's called Minturn by the railroad people, and that's where the engine facility is, and I store equipment there. Here's a little bit better picture of it. I do have some run through power, not much. Just this is Amtrak number 6. Going into a tunnel, and this is a 55 car unit coal train at 2x2x1 DPUs. And when you own a railroad, one of the things you can do is you can buy a business car and not tell your wife. So that's what this is. This is me, the short old guy here, and this is my son Matt. And my wife and daughter are in the railroad car. They're drinking wine. We're going down to the baseball game at Coors Field in Denver, which is right next to Union Station down there. And that's it, gang. Let me stop sharing screen. Okay, that's it, Jim.
Paul, thank you so much for being here this evening.
Thank you.
Well, gentlemen, I appreciate all 3 of you being here tonight. And I got some questions because what I'm trying to do is communicate with the other modelers your feeling about N-scale and why you think it's good, bad, or indifferent. So let me start here with why should anybody consider N-scale for their model railroading? What should I consider when I'm selecting N-scale? What's the drawbacks from N-scale? What do I need to know before I commit to N-scale as my model railroad scale?
Well, I'd start, and then you guys jump in here, but I'd start with basically how much room do you have? If you don't have much room, why it becomes kind of obvious. If you got a lot of room, you could go to HO. There's a lot more equipment, a lot more available in HO than there is in N-scale. Not that we're hurting very much, but there is a lot more selection in HO than N.
Okay.
It depends, among other things, about how much room you have. I operate on a N-scale layout. It's called the Krandik. It's owned by Pat Lana here in the Denver area, and it has no mountains, no hills, or anything. But it's a lot of operating. We operate, 5 hours every Saturday, every once in a while on Saturday. So that's still an option if you want to operate too.
The space was my major consideration. I kind of like to get more bang for the buck and to have more visual, more operating, and a little bit more fun in a confined space. Of course, by 6x12 is pretty large, but some of you guys have systems that are much larger than that, but I'm happy with mine. There's still a lot I'd like to put on, but when I get a new house, I'll consider that. Coaling country, rock and gravel, and other trackside industries, maybe a trailer park or 3.
In my case, Jim, I simply couldn't help myself. When I walked into a train show as a kid, I gravitated toward N-scale, even though my dad was HO. My uncle had a Lehigh Valley layout in Pennsylvania he hosted sessions every Saturday, every month for years, but I was an N-scaler. if I had, and what I tell new modelers when they're trying to decide what scale to choose, I say you've got to go with what you're attracted to, regardless of any other outside factors. If I had 10 square feet or 10,000 square feet, I'd be in N scale. That's just me.
I got you. For me, it was when I tried it out, we lived in an apartment, a small apartment. And I had a 2x4, and that was the maximum that I could use. So for me, it wasn't an option. I mean, I went to N scale, and I couldn't even get it to go around the corner. So I gave up. But those were back in the good old days.
Yeah, it was 40 years ago, Jim. There's a lot of technology has changed in that length of time.
I understand. So let me ask you this. How does N scale run? Do cars stay on the track? Does the motor power run well? Is the track reliable? Do the switches work? I mean, how good a scale is this?
Reliable enough that an investment, in my case, in sound, additional lighting, working ditch lights, and other details on each locomotive, including 4-axle small locomotives, is worth the effort. As a matter of fact, you can actually improve on what are already well-running locomotives with the right kind of decoder that enhances the motor capability to where I can get that proverbial tie per minute movement. And that's important to me for switching operations in prototype operating.
So Chris, let me ask you then, if that's, you say it's N scale all the way for you, and you have all these, are you strictly new locomotives or are you old locomotives? Are you installing your own decoders and sound, or are you buying them with already done by the manufacturer?
My locomotive fleet dates back to the early 90s when Atlas, who led the way in improving N scale, came up with a split frame. Not originally, they came up with an HO-like frame, but quickly went to a split frame mechanism and a good motor. They were built for Atlas by Kato. And so that fleet has been modified. I do my own sound installs. I do my own milling. I do my own wiring, disassembly, reassembly, custom painting, because the models from that time frame to today are worth the investment. They run so well. Now you can get models off the shelf with sound installed, but that's only the recent 5 or 6 years that that's been the case.
Yeah. I'm an HO guy myself, but I am doing installs for a customer in Baltimore, and I have balloon fingers, which doesn't help working on N scale. I'm installing the sound for him and the new decoders, and he's got a whole fleet of old locomotives. And I'm cursing every one of them that I do.
Ralph, what are you saying are old? Do you know what the dates are, perhaps?
Well, okay. No, I don't. This is an old Kato unit. Well, you're not going to be able to see it. This is an old Kato unit that I've had to, I don't have the milling machine or anything to cut the chassis down. I was not going to sit for hours gumming up a file, trying to file it down. So I took it out to the table saw and chopped down the back underneath the decoder so that I could get the speaker in. And then you have to consider the old light bar that comes with it. The LED had a nice long leg on it, and those LEDs are hard to come by these days. I'm just finding it very difficult. I have 39 of these locomotives to do for him: Atlas, Intermountain, and Kato. So they not only were they sound and decoder, they were paint job and weathering.
Oh,
Ralph, I hope you get a lot of money for that job, because that's going to be a lot of hard work.
yeah.
Yeah, I've got a little bit of everything. I mean, Mahano, MRC, and of course, nobody's collection is not complete without one of these little babies, the Lima Pancake Motor. And this one actually runs.
Huh.
So my stuff goes back to, the early days of Yugoslavia, all the way up to, the latest and greatest of Cato. As a matter of fact, I'm waiting delivery on a new Cato steam engine. God, the name escapes me right now. So I'm still collecting. I will not overlook an old engine if I can get it up and running and just putz it around the track under DC for a little bit just to go, good old days.
Yeah.
In the early 80s, while I was stationed in Germany, the dollar was pretty good on the Deutschmark at the time. It was West Germany. And Minitrix and Arnold Rapido and had, of course, it was DC mostly back then, German prototypes that I started purchasing, and they ran so much better than our American prototypes. But then Atlas came out with an RS3, and it changed the whole game. That was a Kato built, I believe, RS3 that Atlas marketed about 1982, I want to say.
Yeah, that's about right.
But the German stuff ran better than any of the American at the time, as I recall.
That's when they started to go forwards in proper speed instead of backwards at full speed.
Let me ask you,
Getting back to your original, Jim, getting back to your original question about how they run, if you go to a train show and look at Amtrak, we run 100-car trains all the time, and they can be coal trains, they can be refrigerator cars, sand hoppers, things like that. But if you look at layout, maybe 20 by 40, 60, 80 feet, wherever many people show up, each one of those modules has individual track work in it, and every individual that puts that together has various skills in putting track down. And you can run those trains for hours and they don't fall off the track. I run my train when I have an open house. I turn the train on and walk out, and I never go in that room again. And it runs for 8 hours because you got to do a little bit of, make sure when you're building it, you have some reasonable track work laid down. And unfortunately, because when I built my layout, which was in 1980, there was no Code 55 track available. There were articles about Code 55 track, but you couldn't find it. So I built mine out of Atlas 80, Code 80, and the switches are Code 80, and that layout now is what, close to 35, 40 years old, and it runs fine. Now I continue to work on it, but not on the track work. I work on the layout.
I personally believe Atlas may have single-handedly saved N scale. That's my feeling, having been purchasing and running.
I would add to that, Chris, that micro trains, which is the N scale portion of KD.
Yes.
The micro trains came out with a set of trucks and couplers, and that is my standard. I don't care how much money I spend to buy on a new car and what kind of trucks it has, whatever they've got on it, they're coming off, and I'm putting micro trains, couplers and trucks on it, because
I think micro trains is still the standard.
Yes.
No matter how many other well-running copycat systems there are, micro trains is still the standard.
Yes, and some of the new stuff is kind of bad. Yeah, I've had some really bad luck with couplers and stuff trying to make them work, and
Yeah, I can
It's looking
specifically
about-
tell who you're talking about as well.
yeah.
Yeah.
Oh, I think one of them was built here in Colorado. But yeah,
So what you guys are saying is you've really got to pick and choose the manufacturer that you're going to use and kind of standardize to that manufacturer for trucks, couplers, cars, engines.
It helps, but wouldn't that be the same in any scale, pretty much in scale modeling?
Is it more so in
Unfortunately,
scale?
I think that's debatable. I think out of the box, most of what's on the market that's not toy grade is going to run well,
Yeah.
probably with some tuning. I mean, we all probably have to fiddle with some tuning of the locomotives out of the box. I do. I fiddle with them until I get them to run reliably. And you usually know what manufacturer is going to give you a hard time and which manufacturer is not going to give you any of a hard time.
Yep.
But I don't know that is that any different from, say, HO? I don't know. I suspect it isn't that much different from HO.
Let me ask you this. Where does somebody go that's new to N-scale to find out the locomotives that are going to give you problems, that or just can use a little tinkering and they'll run beautifully? Where does somebody go to find out which track they should use if they're beginning in N-scale? Where is that information readily available?
That's a good point. For me, it's been trial and error, buy this, buy that, and see what works. As far as engines and cars and whatnot, I often source spooknet.org, or is it .net? Especially when I'm restoring the older engines and whatnot, kind of gives me an idea of what's going on.
What was that site? Is that a Facebook group or what is that?
It's a web page. Let me see if I can call it up.
I personally, I would.
Spookshow.net.
I'm sorry.
Spookshow.net.
Yeah. It wouldn't be Facebook, but it might be Facebook. There, unfortunately, with something like Facebook, there's so much bad information being put out. Hey, look, I bought this locomotive. It runs great. But then again, when you find out who manufactured it, where it came from, that can be a problem. But there's still also a lot of good information on Facebook. Yeah, the best thing is a group of people that know what they're doing would probably be that. I mean, the division, NMRA division, perhaps a club.
model club.
Yeah,
Well,
people that
okay.
actually run the locomotives and so forth.
Chris, good point. If you go to a train show and there's an Amtrak group there are a whole bunch of guys who know what they're doing and what they're talking about.
Absolutely.
And if you're an NMRA, there's generally a division in your area, and you can go to those meetings, and there'll be some N-scale people there, and they love to talk about it.
I wish there were more Fremo N groups,
Yeah.
but they're a fantastic resource for very good work.
Yep.
And their requirements are pretty precise. So a Fremo group would be my first choice. I wish there were more. My region of the country has no Fremo. West Coast does, some in the northern areas. I'm not so sure about the East Coast. Some of you guys listening might know.
Let me ask you this, guys. What about the framework? Is the framework more picky in N-scale than it is in the other scales?
It's the same as HO. You better do a good job. You don't have to. It drives me nuts, but you don't have to have something that'll hold a tank.
Right.
Just need to have a good sound L-girders framework or whatever you want to use. And some good, depending on where you live and so forth, good plywood road bed, and then put some soundproofing on top of that if you wish, and some cork road bed, and you're home free. There's nothing unusual about N-scale.
What about a prototypical modeler who wants the operation to be like, it needs to be prototypical? Or he has a switching layout, again, because of space, but he wants to have it prototypical. Is that possible in N-scale?
I believe absolutely it is.
Sure.
For the major roadways and even some of the non, the ones that have been absorbed over the in the 70s. I mean, there's a ton of Union Pacific. Of course, there's Amtrak. If you want to do modern, there's plenty of stuff from the 40s on to the 50s and pre-war. It's all out there. It's just a matter of how anal you want to be in setting up your track system.
Good point.
Well, let me ask you this. For N-scale, I hear different people talk about different standards. I hear NMRA standards. I hear NMRA 6 standards. I hear N-track, different clubs. What standard should I use? Where should I go for a standard if I choose N-scale?
Right behind you on the wall, NMRA.
Right.
And the manufacturers are doing pretty well at that, at least for track work and locomotives. And as for, layout and modular standards, N-Rail's sort of a group of all of the different modular groups they're trying to coalesce.
Yeah.
Will have plenty of documentation on the layout part of it, but the manufacturers are doing just as well with NMRA standards as HO manufacturers are.
Gotcha. What about this T-track that I keep hearing about?
That I'm not familiar with.
I'm not familiar with that either.
That's a Kato sectional based concept, originated pretty much in Japan. They don't have the space. A modeler could build a 1x1 T-track module using Kato's standard straight pieces, either a 2-track straight or a single track straight, usually 2-track. Then they could get on a bus with that sitting on their lap and go to a meeting with other friends and put together a tabletop running layout.
Right.
And it has caught on quite a bit in the US as well. Divisions have T-track layouts they take to shows to show various groups. And what's interesting is at least 2 divisions I know, other scale modelers involved in other scales tend to participate by building a module here and there.
Well, are there standards for those modules, those small modules?
Yes, there are.
Is that NMRA standards or?
No, it's T-track standard under the N-Rail group. They can point someone in the right direction. You can actually buy module kits that actually build the module from companies. I think there's a couple, 3 companies. Clark could tell you about that. But it's caught on because it's an easy way to put together an operating layout on a couple of folding tables. That's what it was designed for, using a very standardized sectional track that's of high quality that you buy from Kato. And they all hook together and you run trains.
And you run the standard N-scale trains on it.
Standard N-scale equipment, DCC or DC, depends on what the group wants to use.
So I hear a lot about modules, people not building layouts, but building modules. It seems like for the module builder, that's a perfect solution.
Actually, it's too small.
Okay, that's what I needed to hear.
I'm an HO guy, but the module that Chris is talking about is 1 foot square. And you just keep adding 1 foot square. Now, there's nothing to say that you can't make it 2 feet long or 3 feet long, but then it defeats the purpose.
Yeah, they do have kits for two section or 2 foot by 1 foot, as well as 3 foot by 1 foot. But it was designed originally as 1 foot squares that everybody brings, and you hook them all up together and trains run.
Gotcha.
See
What about,
Seeing it whatever way you want.
well, let's talk about scenery a minute. Trees, scenery material, structures, figures, all of the stuff that other scales have. Does N scale have all of that?
Sure,
Yeah.
sure.
But you can look at Paul's work and see, I mean, there is no, it's not shy.
What about kits? What about scratch building? Is everything just pre-made? You buy it, open the box, put it on the layout?
Well, you can do that, or you can, you know, go to eBay and buy broken pieces. They're often being sold,
The laser
and you can
kit
start
companies.
kit bashing. You know, make up
Laser
your own
kits.
building. You can build out of wood. You can build out of paper. There are places to go where you can print yourself a cardboard house, and you know, from a distance of about 4 or 5 feet, they look very realistic. It just depends on how intimate you want to be with your modeling and your scenery. You can scratch build trees, you can buy them pre-made, and I think most of them are wire, so you can actually customize them a little bit.
Is there anything that's not available in N scale that you guys would like to see?
That's a good question.
I can't think of anything could, all you do is if you get in trouble, you figure out what they did in HO and either scratch build it or somebody will sell it to you eventually.
Yeah, and exploring options on, you know, for my track, you know, I've seen there are modelers out there who will custom build you, you know, container ship,
Yep.
drawbridges, lift bridges, you know, all sorts of stuff. Anything you possibly need, you know, for a container port, like the huge sky cranes that hang over the ships and load and offload. You know, it's all out there if you got the money.
I suspect, Jim, that the steam era modelers could do with more selection in steam locomotives.
Yeah,
Yep.
probably right.
We're really good in diesel. Not as good in first generation diesel, but from second generation on, we're pretty good in diesel. I suspect the steam modelers would like more.
Gotcha.
Yeah, it's amazing how the small shunters have all disappeared, you know, because nobody just wanted to try to put motors in them.
But that's also true of HO too. I just read an article, I'm not sure which magazine, but they were looking for 060 switchers and so forth in HO scale because they're not being made anymore. And what was it, 440s, engines like that?
Yeah.
I think the manufacturers are looking at the money and saying, well, it's going to cost this amount and it's going to cost the same amount to make this one. But if I build a bigger engine, I can get more people interested in it. And so they make more money.
What about the promotion of N scale? Is N scale really being promoted, I mean, to new modelers, or, you know, what, do you have any thoughts on the need for promotion for N scale?
I really haven't seen that much. You know, even talking, my son's in their 20s and one's a teacher, and you know, the kids never heard about it. I plan to take a little bit of my tracks and whatnot, and build up a little mock-up for them, and introduce them to the hobby. But right now, it's basically a gray-haired hobby.
We're better off than O scale. That's for sure.
Yes. Yes.
Now.
Now, in terms of exposure, product availability, scale, precision, I think we're better off than even O scale. There's exceptions to that, but O scale's much smaller than N scale is in terms of total participation.
Yes.
What's in scale tomorrow going to be like? Today is totally different than when it was back in the 60s. I think everybody would probably agree with that. But what's it going to be in 20 years? Is 3D printing going to take it over? What's going to happen to in scale?
Well, I think 3D printing is coming into its own. It's still examples I've seen, they've either been very good or very primitive. But basically, it's all going to be computer controlled. You're going to have your layout up on your 56-inch screen, and that will be small by then. And running off your computer.
I hope not.
Yeah.
Or server. Because the kids, if they really want to get into it and be stimulated by it, it's going to have to compete with robotics and other electrical gadgetry, so to speak. And that's how you get them into it. Turn it into a 3D video game. I think that's where it's going to have to go.
Okay. So really the modeling part of it is going to go by the wayside.
No, I think it will still be there, but I think it's going to be a hybrid, electronically computer controlled. We're seeing that now with DCC, and people are constantly coming up with new ways to implement it, and tricks to do with DCC, and this will eventually go mainstream. The modeling will still be there, the trees, the mountains, the tunnels, the buildings, the lighting up, the guy in the shop welding, with the spark going on. That will still all be there, but it will be more controlled. Instead of having a circuit that randomizes a light, that light will be timed to go on at a certain time to simulate reality. The most impressive thing I've ever seen is, and I think it's an HO scale, is that humongous computer-controlled multi-faceted train system they have in Germany.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
This is the first video I ever saw of it, basically was based around an airport. And they had planes taxiing and taking off and landing, and one burning up off to the side, and fire and rescue coming to it, and they just started expanding and expanding and expanding with, different areas and different themes. And they're running 20, 30 high-powered computers just to keep this thing going.
Jim, I think Chris had something on his layout that's kind of it has always intrigued me, and that's he had an engine that ran off battery power. And I think as these automobiles come along and they learn more and more about batteries, and I'm sure they know quite a bit now, that they're going to get batteries small enough that you can put them in N scale. Jim already got some. And we're going to be able to run our trains, I don't know, with radio control with battery power. And and that's going to be super when we get to that point.
Honestly, I kind of wish, as much as I appreciate layout control, busing, I wish the NMRA had put the effort the last decade and a half on battery on board technology, because an N scale is no different than any other scale where your power is through the rails. Power and data is through the rails. We have got to get away from all that entails, including the maintenance and the cleaning.
Yes. Good point.
I don't think young people have the patience for it until they get older. But if we can go battery on board for all scales, that's the future I would like to see.
Now,
That's
when you say
science
battery on
right.
board, I'm sorry, I talked over somebody.
No, that's all right. Go ahead.
When you say battery on board, are you talking about strictly for the DCC logic control and your power for the motor coming through the rails and
No.
everything else coming through
No,
Wi-Fi?
nothing would come through the rails. Nothing at all. Neither the data message in DCC protocol, nor the current required to move the motor. None of that would come through the rails. It would all come over wireless for the data and battery for the current,
And
which
that-
is what I'm doing right now.
So that will eliminate the need to clean boulders and the cat off the track.
Right.
You could
Right.
spray paint the track rusty color and never have to clean it.
Yep.
Yeah.
And I think that would really be a boon for the steam people, because they can put some of the, in a diesel engine, there's not too much room in these hoods, but you could get a tender and you can put a battery in there and some kind of a radio controlled decoder in the steam engine. And boy, that would be super for those
It
people.
would be awesome. It's the way I
Yes.
would go now if I
Yes.
had steam.
Yep.
Well, if you've seen any of the videos, this guy in Japan, he's running 187 scale remote control cars. And the technology is there. The problem is on the locomotive, diesel, you need a power pack that's going to last you for an operating session, which means somehow you're going to have a box car or something tethered to that locomotive, because there's no way you can get the battery size into the locomotive.
Well, this can be done.
Everything else
with,
is all doable. They've got, I mean, they even have these tiny servos for steering this 187 scale cars, not big trucks, cars. And it's absolutely amazing to see. The guys are using crawlers with a bucket on the front, and they're picking up sand and moving it and filling up dump trucks, all 187 scale. So it is doable down to N scale, as far as I can see.
I think there are some examples on YouTube of things near maybe 150 scale doing something like that.
There's a whole group in Germany that's doing 187 remote control cars and construction vehicles. And the guy that started it is in Japan. He's a dentist.
Well, getting back to finding the room to put all this stuff in, I mean, in the short term, you know, as technology permits it getting smaller and smaller, putting a dummy engine in a line of constants, you know, that has the battery and maybe another one has the Wi-Fi system or whatnot to control all that. You know, I'm really not up on that electronics, but, you know, even throwing in a slug or two for battery packs.
Yeah.
You know, for the short term, that would help the technology evolve.
Well, listen, gentlemen, I really do appreciate it. Let me stop here a minute and ask the viewers, you have any other questions for our panel?
I have one more. Oh, you're talking about, okay.
Please go ahead.
All right. An Atlas SD9 or SD26 or something like that. What type of decoder are you using in that? I cannot find one to fit. I have.
Do you know
three of
how
those
old the shell is, or the SD9 or 24? I don't think we've had Atlas's 24s. You remember, Paul? I mean, it's been over a decade since
Yeah.
that model's
Look
been
at
on the
mine.
market.
Yeah.
That's right.
Ralph, have you looked at
Any dates?
TCS's long form factor drop-in N scale decoder?
No, I haven't.
Look at the TCS line. Now they're not sound, but look at the TCS line of decoders. They have medium, long, and shorts designed for a lot of the Atlas locomotives.
Right.
I'm not familiar with the SD24's split frame design, but it's probably standard for Atlas.
Yeah.
I know, the layout I operate on, he runs a lot of SD24s and GP20s.
It's DCC, Paul.
Yes, everything's
Yeah,
DC.
we ought to ask Patrick what he's running in those
Okay.
and get Ralph an answer, because it would save him a whole bunch of time. He doesn't have to adapt to milling the shells or the frames.
Yeah, I'll ask Pat and I'll give it to Jim, and Jim can get it to Ralph because I don't have Ralph's
Yeah.
email. But
There's
that's
the, yeah, that's the local I'm referring to.
well, that's a good looking engine.
As far as I know, it's an SD26. That's what's on the box.
Ralph, can you send me an email so that I can forward it theirs to you?
You've got my email.
I got
Clark,
your email.
yep, you got it from Clark.
Oh, I got you. Okay, I got it.
My guess, Ralph, it's going to take a TCS long version drop in to make that work.
Okay. All right.
Maybe a medium. TCS actually, I think, has a compatibility page on their website for that.
Yep.
So does Digitrax, don't they, Paul?
Yes, they
Digitrax
do.
has one.
Yep.
Yeah.
Look under the TCS website.
Now,
Okay,
it
I'll
wouldn't
do
be
that.
hard to put an ESU in there, but that's a sound equip typically, if you want sound. I don't know if you want
Right.
sound.
Well, I'm looking at it. I have an ESU dealership, so I was kind of looking at that and talking with Matt Herman. At the moment, he doesn't have anything because he can't get parts.
Yeah, he's trying to transition to the Locksound 5
Yep.
for the older Atlas frames. Older, I say last 10 years, 20 years maximum.
Yeah.
Anybody
just
else
not
have any questions?
Is anybody awake out there?
I got
I've been listening.
about the LEDs. Now that
I'm sorry,
gentleman is
could
having,
you repeat that? I didn't hear it.
I'd like to say something about the problem with getting the LEDs. That gentleman, I can't remember who his name was on here talking. LEDs.
Paul,
hear
that
me
may
all
be
right?
your-
Anyhow, evansdesign.com has just about anything you need.
Yes.
They have different lengths of, I think about 2 different lengths on the LEDs, and they come with a resistor in them. They operate between 5 and 12 volts. And I
Okay.
believe you could get them with a rectifier if you want one. You'll install one.
Evan Design.
Pardon?
Evan Designs?
Right, Evan Design, EVAN Design.com. They're in
Okay.
Colorado.
Yep, they're north of Colorado here.
Ralph, you
Yeah,
don't want to
so-
do your own magnet wiring soldering?
Give me a break. I told you I have balloon fingers.
Okay, thank you. I just wanted to put that in for
It's good.
anybody having problems.
Guys, something I'd like to mention, this is Greg. One of the common vendors that was on Jim's train show, when he held them last year, was Locofy, run by Piyush Garg. And I put his email, or the company email, in the chat. He's been making decoders that you can operate with your phone and run with a battery for the last few years. And it might be worth some people looking for who are interested in that type of thing.
All right.
Anybody else have any more questions?
Yeah, hi. I can't help but notice that 2/3 of the N scalers here have stringed instruments in their background. Is that about a common number for S scalers? And maybe I should ask Paul what his excuse is.
I'm the world's worst when it comes to music.
Yeah, I'm more, my fingers have gotten stiff, so, I'm from the school of 9 thumbs. I mostly collect now. This is, what's behind me is probably about a third of my collection. It's guitars, pedal steels, dulcimers, hammer dulcimers. If it has a string on it, I usually like to collect it.
Well, listen, guys, I can't thank you enough tonight for being here and telling us about what N-Scale today is all about. I think I've learned a lot. I hope everybody else has, and I hope if you're interested in this scale because of space, because you want to run longer trains perhaps, or whatever your rationale is, I do think that N-Scale is worth a second look for a lot of us. So gentlemen, thanks again for all your help. The other comment that I'd like to make is I'd like to see if we can do this kind of a panel for the other scales. If S-scale modelers have an interest, if they'll contact me, then I'd like to try to put together a panel for S-scale, for O-scale, for HO, for Z, and see if we can't find out in detail more about the scales from actual people who are in it and who deal with the situation daily. So thanks again, guys. I really do appreciate it.